So Fritz Lang. You can see my complete thoughts on Fritz Lang and how he kind of struggled in the Hollywood studio system here. Otherwise, we're just going to get right to the rankings. Number 40 is American Guerillas in the Philippines. This movie is really just boring. It reminded me of actually a couple of John Ford movies for very different reasons. The first would be Donovan's Reef, where John Ford, John Wayne, and Lee Marvin went to Hawaii and just kind of made a movie. They seemed to be having fun, even if the movie didn't really connect. This movie doesn't really connect, and no one feels like they're having fun. The other one is They Were Expendable, which is about, kind of relationships in wartime and how we have to connect with people even if the connection is very temporary because there may be no tomorrow. There is a subplot in there there's a subplot in here that kind of recalls that, but is so poorly done that it just feels like extra material within the film. So it's the story of Ensign Palmer, played by Tyrone Powers, and he is left behind in the Philippines after MacArthur leaves during World War II. So he has to try to find a way out. He ends up being a guerrilla, leading a small group of men to fight Japanese forces in the area. And he meets Jean, a French woman in the area that he falls in love with. She is married. Is there any doubt at all about whether these two are going to end up together in the end? Have you ever seen a movie before? The husband's going to die, they're going to end up together. Yes, this is kind of a weird primary focus, and bringing up They Were Expendable, there's no real solid effort to integrate it into the rest of the movie. It's just, here are some scenes of Palmer and Jean having a good time together. It's weird. And the guerrilla stuff is really, it's oddly obsessed with building a radio tower, and it's just presented so flatly and boringly that it's just not interesting. It does kind of pick up towards the end with a very competently created action scene, but that's really the extent of it. It is like 5 minutes towards the end of this 90-minute long picture that is mostly just dull and lifeless as it eases from one little scene to the next with little connective tissue. The movie is the bottom of Fritz Lang's filmography for a reason. Number 39 is The Wandering Shadow. This is very early Lang, it's silent German stuff, and this is before he made anything that I would really consider good. And this movie is such a mess narratively. It's hurt by the fact that there are missing chunks of it, mostly towards the beginning. But I don't think that the film has enough outside of those chunks for making me to believe that the missing chunks would actually help. And so what we have is a film that is all coincidence and plot with almost no character. And so you have all of these wildly weird and outlandish coincidences just happening to drive plot full of characters that I don't care about. This movie's not good. So it's the story of Irmgard. She is a widow. She was married to George, and she is just trying to flee her husband's cousin, who is out to get her inheritance because he thinks it belongs to him. However, that gets immediately resolved and is not a recurring plot. She's also in league with John, who is George's twin brother, and coincidentally, as Irmgard is fleeing her husband's cousin up a mountain in the German Alps, she coincidentally comes across George, who is not dead. The level of coincidence around all of this is ridiculous. She's just randomly choosing to run somewhere, and she happens upon the man that she had married but didn't actually marry. There's a bunch of backstory about how the free love movement and how marriage didn't actually happen. It's all so absurd, and it all really needs strong emotional connection in order to get over the fact that we are completely driven by plot mechanics and coincidence. It doesn't work. However, that being said, the movie does look really good because most of it was actually filmed on location. And so actually filming in like the little lakes in the German Alps, going up into the mountains, creates all of this opportunity for wonderful compositions. And so once we actually get late into the film, where there's a bunch of snow when they're trying to reach a lone statue of the Virgin Mary, it looks fantastic. It's just tied to characters I could not give a hoot or holler about. This movie is just, it's kind of dead on arrival. Number 38 is The Spiders Episode 2, The Diamond Ship. As by the title, this was obviously the second part in a series. There were apparently 2 more films planned in the series, but they got canceled after this. I kind of doubt it's because of the quality. I mean, I don't like the film. I think it's bad. But it's probably because the movie just didn't make a whole lot of money. And so just the rest of the series got canceled. So it's a continuation of the first. I haven't talked about the first yet, but the first doesn't really matter. This is really a globe-trotting adventure that feels weirdly small and inconsequential. It's about our hero from the previous film, Kay, who is trying to avenge the death of the girl at the end of the first episode by pursuing the mysterious criminal enterprise, the Spiders. The Spiders are after a diamond that looks like Buddha that is supposed to give them complete control of Asia. So whatever, it's thin adventure boy stuff, it's whatever. The problem is that the actual mystery and adventure is deeply unsatisfying. We go from essentially room to room in different countries without any sort of sense of actually going to different exotic places. It pretty much starts in San Francisco in Chinatown. Outside of Chinatown, it is actually kind of the one part of the film that actually feels tactile and organic, and it looks good. But once you're out of that, you're on a ship to South America, and that's mostly just a room in the ship. You have scenes in England, but again, it's just a room in England. So the globe-trotting effect of it just completely falls flat because most of it is just rooms that we're told are, well, it's in England. The other problem is the actual pursuit of the mystery. We get entire sequences where nothing gets advanced or resolved. So it's just mostly getting characters from one place to another without actually advancing the mystery of it all. It is deeply unsatisfying as a globe-trotting adventure, and that is it at its core. However, you know, it's a relatively short hour, 45 minutes for an adventure movie, so it's constantly moving, which is nice. It does look good in the beginning. It's not the best thing that he had made at this point in his career. It's still very early. There are some other physical production design things in this early career that look a bit better, but the Chinatown stuff does look good. And it kind of understands that it really is just about movement. So it is just constantly moving. It's just nothing is actually happening while it's moving. So it's a bit of a drudgery to get through, but it's far from the worst thing. It's like it's an adventure movie that moves. Sometimes that's kind of all you need. I needed a bit more though. Number 37 is Moonfleet. Now, sometimes you see a movie on an entry in a list and you're just kind of flabbergasted. That happened with me with Moonfleet. Cahiers du Cinema, a few years ago, decided that they were going to make a list of the best movies ever made. This is number 32. I don't get it at all. It's a boys' adventure movie. It calls back to some of the early stuff that Lang was making in Germany, like The Spiders, like Woman in the Moon, but I find the film weirdly disconnected, and it mostly has to do with the first half of the film. So it's the story of a 10-year-old boy, John. His mother has died, and he is off to find an acquaintance of his mother named Jeremy Fox. He meets up with him. Fox tries to put him in an orphanage. The kid escapes, and then Fox kind of takes to him. Fox is head of a smuggling ring, and there's a bunch of gang stuff about how he is trying to control his gang, and his gang is mad at him because little John found out about the smuggling cash, and none of it ends up mattering in the end. The movie is more than 2 hours long, and so much of the first half feels like it just doesn't matter. Like you could hard cut it out and nothing would be lost. And I really think that massively hurts the film. The other big part of the story is Lord and Lady Ashcroft, played wonderfully, both by George Sanders and Joan Greenwood. And, Lady Ashcroft obviously has a thing for the younger Jeremy Fox. They're trying to build like a little privateer force, but they're like being cagey about it, and I don't really get it. You can be a privateer under the crown, and that's essentially what they're trying to do. And all of like the pirate stuff doesn't matter in the end. There is some stuff about the relationship between the three adults that kind of plays out late, but most of the rest doesn't. And it ultimately ends up being this kind of search for a treasure, and where the movie ends up working best is when it's focusing on that, when it's really just Fox and John, little John, kind of having their adventures. They have fun little episodes where they kind of trick British guards and stuff. It's fun. However, the movie as a whole just doesn't come together. It's got large sections that don't really feel like they relate to anything else. It's weird. And, there's no accounting for taste in anything, but seeing this at the top, well, near the top of a list by Cahiers de Cinema is just weird. I don't hate the film. It's sort of okay, but it's overlong for what it does, and it's weirdly disconnected, and I just can't quite get into it. Number 36 is Harakiri. Now, this is an adaptation of the opera Madame Butterfly, and it takes a 2.5-hour opera, and it shrinks it down to 87 minutes and makes it silent. Yes, it's going to suffer, and yes, it does suffer. This is a lot of story to squeeze into 87 minutes, and no one can talk, so it kills the immediacy of character. You can create strong character in silent films. I've seen it done, but ultimately this movie is not interested in trying to do that. It is interested in trying to rush through the plot. However, I end up feeling like I am a little more sympathetic to the film than I probably should be. I really like the ending. I'm not that familiar with Madame Butterfly as, an opera, as a piece of art, so this is really my only real exposure to the story. So I don't know if, I imagine the actual, turn of character at the end is something that's preserved from there. So preserving it here, it feels like a good choice to keep it, but ultimately I feel like it elevates what came before. It's the story of the daughter of a daimyo who has been orphaned because her father was accused of Western influence and instructed to commit seppuku, which he does, leaving her an orphan. And this is all at the hands of a nefarious Buddhist monk who wants her for himself. She is saved by a foreign sailor named Olaf, and they get married. Olaf has to go away because he's a sailor, but he ends up actually marrying another woman and becoming a bigamist. And so the ending is everyone kind of coming together. Coincidence drives a lot of it, especially around the Prince Matahari, and it ends up feeling a little like just heavily coincidental. However, there is a decision late when the woman discovers her husband's bigamy that just kind of makes it all worthwhile to a limited extent. It's yes, this was worth it to a certain degree. However, the real charms of this film are visual. It's about production design. It's about recreating medieval Japan, and it does it fairly well. There are weird choices in terms of how characters operate within this space that make it feel distinctly like a European who doesn't actually know much about Japanese culture trying to recreate it. People take their sandals off at the wrong height. They actually walk around a house in sandals. The women are wearing kimonos way too loosely around their legs. It very much has this distinct feeling of, no, this is not how Japanese culture actually looks and operates. Still, I think the overall film is sort of okay, propped up by the production design and the late stage character choices, but ultimately this is very much a kind of a muddled, overly compressed adaptation of a story that really needs more time and singing. Number 35 is Secret Beyond the Door. This is interesting. This is obviously an attempt to kind of mimic the Gothic romance of Alfred Hitchcock's Rebecca. This also comes right after Lang made Manhunt, which was obviously an effort to mimic other types of Hitchcock movies, namely his like man-on-the-run thrillers. And I feel like this movie completely falls apart in its third act. I mean, completely. Like, it turns into complete parody of Rebecca, or an attempt to recreate Rebecca, rather than, you know, an actual imitation of it. And it's obvious that that wasn't the intention of the film. So it's the story of Celia, played by Joan Bennett. She is suddenly come into some money, and she's set up to marry a man, but then she goes to Mexico for a vacation. She has a whirlwind romance with the British Mark, played by Michael Redgrave, and they quickly marry after 3 days. Mark takes her to his home, and this is where it becomes obvious that this is trying to be Rebecca to a certain level. It's based on a novel. Obviously, this is not an original idea, but it's like, this is trying to be Rebecca, because everything about the house and the staff just feels like, you know, Mrs. De Winter showing up and being confronted with the ghost. Mark has a dead wife, and his staff are weirdly like enamored of her and everything. It's kind of weird. However, there is something that goes on in the house that really entertains me. Mark collects rooms. He collects rooms where grisly murders happened. He gets as much of the original room as possible, furniture, sometimes even parts like the walls and stuff, and he recreates them at his house. There are 6 of them, and the 7th is under lock and key. It tickles me. This is fun. And so the mystery around the film is steadily building. There are a bunch of subplots that I'm not sure if they're ever going to come to anything other than be red herrings, and I'm kind of optimistic about it. And then we have all of Alfred Hitchcock's worst impulses played out terribly. It is about repressed memories and Freudianism suddenly creating massive changes in characters, and Michael Redgrave, he was a fine actor, cannot pull it off. I was thinking of Peter Lorre's performance at the end of M, where he is faced with all of his crimes, and he has this incredible moment where he's like laying himself bare. Michael Redgrave is just prim and proper British, and it doesn't work in this context. And I think it breaks the film, so that by the time like we're getting to the melodramatic culmination of everything in the end, it no longer feels right. It feels like parody, and I can't take it seriously at all. However, the movie's great to look at. There are these big indoor sets mimicking the outside, full of fog, that look fantastic. The house looks great. Joan Bennett is quite good in her central performance. Michael Redgrave, outside of that one moment where he's supposed to break down and pretty much doesn't, is quite good. The supporting cast is solid, but there comes a moment in this film where I can't take it seriously anymore, and it just loses me. And you know what? The movie's okay overall, I guess, but it completely loses me at one point. Number 34 is For Around the Woman. This is actually the first film within Lang's early silent career where I feel like he got better from one movie to the next. There had been this steady degradation of quality from his very first film that was just kind of depressing me, and then all of a sudden this is a step up. It's kind of only okay, it's omnidirectional without a central focus, and it's overstuffed. It kind of feels like 2 movies worth of material stuffed into one movie. But you know what? The character work is decent. So it's the story of Harry. He is married to Florence, but then there are also the rich twins William and Werner, and Werner had to escape the country because of accusations of potential rape around Florence. Harry it's like William, but it was actually William because they're twins. William was trying to get her into bed, and he tied her up and escaped right as Harry was breaking in. It's confusing. And then there's the fourth, the 4 around the woman, is this guy named Munir, who is just kind of a friend and is skeevy and awful. So really, it's just essentially a series of subplots that sort of revolves around Florence, but doesn't really kind of feel like a story on any real level. Harry goes to an illegal diamond exchange, I don't know why, in order to purchase a jewelry for his wife. Why doesn't he just go to a normal one? William also happens to be there, and Werner is actually also is also coincidentally there, but the 2 brothers never actually see each other, even though they're in the same place coincidentally. It's weird. And then there's stuff about Werner getting a loan that he gets robbed of a few minutes later. It's overstuffed with action. However, all of the characters are surprisingly clearly laid out and written, so that when everyone actually ends up in the same place late, and even someone dies, the motivations are all clear. So the actual ending of the film comes together decently well. You know, it's like it all still feels kind of random and unmoored from like an actual story, or there's a bunch of coincidence and stuff leading up to it, so it's ultimately kind of unsatisfying as a whole. But having clear characters in the same room with clear motivations having to butt up against each other is somewhat satisfying. The movie's not good. It's kind of a minor curio within Fritz Lang's very early career, but it's not the worst thing. It's okay. Number 33 is While the City Sleeps. This was Fritz Lang's second to last American film, and it feels like a cheap production with a bad script that was rushed out. It's frustrating. It's the story of newspapermen trying to figure out the identity of the lipstick killer. The lipstick killer was a real killer. This is sort of kind of based on that, but not really. And the main character is Harry, played by a half-drunk Dana Andrews. And this is cornerstone of why I don't like Dana Andrews. He's deeply unconvincing throughout the film, and he's kind of unpleasant. I don't think he's supposed to be unpleasant. He is one of 4 men who is offered the job of head of the newspaper when the owner of the newspaper dies, coincidentally the night that the lipstick killer is striking. He is uninterested in it, and it falls to 3 other men. In particular, George Sanders and Thomas Mitchell. George Sanders and Thomas Mitchell are 2 of my favorite actors from this period. Thomas Mitchell is probably my favorite. And watching the 2 of them have just this wonderful dynamic between them is easily the highlight of the entire film. It's a small chunk of the film, but every single moment those 2 are in the same scene, the movie is gold. I love the 2 as they bounce off of each other. It's great. However, the rest of the newsroom stuff is completely flat. I was thinking of Ace in the Hole, I was thinking of His Girl Friday, I was thinking of The Front Page, I was thinking of movies with energy and something to say about the newspaper business, and Fritz Lang presents the newspaper business like a desk job. It's just kind of dull to watch, outside of the stuff with Sanders and Mitchell. The pursuit of the killer ends up making kind of no sense, mostly because it ends up hanging on Harry, who has an avowed disinterest in breaking rules to pursue a story. So he takes his girl, who is mad at him because he got drunk and kissed another woman, and he makes her bait for the lipstick killer. And she just accepts it. So he's putting his own girl in danger, her life in danger, to pursue a story he said he wasn't that interested in pursuing. It's weird. There's a bunch of coincidence that drives a lot of the late action, like people just coincidentally living next to each other. We do get looks at the lipstick killer, and it's Freudian nonsense. It's not as laugh out loud funny and poorly placed as it is in Secret Beyond the Door, but it definitely doesn't help. Cut that scene at least. And overall, the film just feels weirdly limp and not all that convincing. It's really carried by the few scenes that Sanders and Mitchell have together. Everything outside of that is sort of okay, where it's kind of lifeless, but we're pursuing something fairly clear. And I can't recommend the film, but if you can just pull the scenes out with Sanders and Mitchell, those are worth watching. Number 32 is Spies. Now, a lot of people like this film, and I've seen it a couple of times, and I always really, really struggle with it. Plans make no sense. There's a huge distraction that lasts for a really long time, and I just feel disconnected from all of the action and all of the characters through most of it until we get to an action finale that is actually quite spectacular. It's the story of 326. He's a spy, and he is... it's also the story of Sonia, a spy for a criminal organization run by Hagi. And Sonia is ordered to get close to 326. And it doesn't make sense. It has nothing to do with, her core mission, which is stealing information from someone else. It just feels like this extra thing, and it takes up a very long chunk of the first half of the film. For the first hour, the film is a romance. It's a romance between 326 and Sonia. And I don't think it actually like contributes to the film all that much. We get this long distraction from spy action, and the romance itself is fine. 326 is like doe-eyed and in love with this woman, but 326 is also this hardened spy, and he is completely besotted by a pretty face. It doesn't actually make sense. And then the actual plot of everything, I don't understand the reasoning why Hagi wants the information that leads to like a secret diplomatic agreement between Japan and the United Kingdom that he wants to steal. There are some wonderful visuals. The Japanese ambassador sends 3 different men, couriers, out to send the agreement back to Japan. All 3 get killed, and then he is presented with their ghosts, and he bows to them, and then he commits seppuku. And it's like, it's surprisingly like effective visually. I don't feel anything because it's a minor character, but it looks really good. And the film just kind of like, it is early focused on this romance, which I don't think makes much sense, but actually does kind of have an effective element within its own context, which then feels disconnected from all of the machinations of the plot, which I don't think actually make a whole lot of sense. And then everything kind of coalesces into a big chase by the end, which is I enjoy. It's like the actual love affair between 326 and Sonya does actually play into everything, but it doesn't feel it doesn't feel like a culmination of a plot that I've actually cared about with characters that I actually have invested in. I'm frustrated by Spies every time I watch it. I want to like it more. I want to be in line with everyone else. But this feels like a spy epic that doesn't actually know what it's doing. And I find it frustrating. Number 31 is The Return of Frank James. This is actually a sequel to another filmmaker's previous film. It's a sequel to Henry King's Jesse James. And this is actually a good bit better. The original Jesse James was heavily sanitized and it felt very fake, and I never really got into it. This, for almost more than half of its runtime, is actually quite compelling. It's completely freed from any need to be relatively close to reality, and it shows Frank James deciding to take out vengeance upon Bob Ford and Charlie Ford for the murder of his brother. And the pursuit of Bob Ford is quite compelling. It's about creating like an alibi for Frank in order to get him out of blame for a robbery that he actually did, and it's also an effort to convince the Ford brothers that Frank James is dead, so they'll actually come out of hiding and start doing the show that they actually did in real life, where they recreated the murder of Jesse James. And it's steadily building characters and situations, and it's actually quite interesting and compelling. And then all of a sudden the movie stops. It stops hard for like 30 minutes and becomes a completely unrelated courtroom drama. Their cover story meant that they were killed in Mexico, but it created this opportunity for like a black a friend of theirs to be arrested for a crime. And so Frank James has to go and testify at this trial, and the trial lasts for like 30 minutes. And it has like nothing to do with anything, and it's mostly just rehashing everything that already came before. It absolutely and totally and completely kills the movie. There is no drive left after this is done. And the movie still has stuff to go because Bob Ford shows up and he's like, oh, I'm gonna gloat because Frank James is gonna get in prison, but Frank James gets off and we finally have our duel between them. This is obviously has nothing to do with how Bob Ford actually died. Bob Ford was shot by a no-name who was trying to make a name for himself. Charlie Ford killed himself. He didn't get killed by Frank James. So it's like, yeah, but I mean, it's like, the first like half of the film is like really surprisingly solid. And then we have a courtroom drama. I hate courtroom dramas in general. They almost never work. And this time it's just, it has nothing to do with the rest of the film. At the same time, it's just rehashing the rest of the film. It's a weird choice. It feels like a financial choice. It's like we need to make this movie as cheap as possible, but ultimately it just doesn't actually work. It is not good. It's sort of okay because of its first half. Number 30 is The Spiders, Episode 1, The Golden Sea. This is Fritz Lang's very first surviving film. It was his third directed film. And it's just, much like Episode 2, it's just an adventure story. And you know what? I think it's much better than episode 2. It's more focused, it's shorter, and it actually has a bit more spectacle in essentially the right place. Story of Kay, he comes across a message in a bottle that tells him of a secret treasure buried in like an Incan territory in southern Mexico. He shows it off to the people in his club, one of whom is Leo Shah, who is a secret member of the Spiders, the criminal organization. And they steal the information from him and leave him alive. Why do they leave him alive? So the movie can happen. And so he chases her down into Mexico, and it's all about, just adventure stuff as they get to the secret Incan society and try to get the treasure. It's fun. There's actually a sense of actually moving around across the world. In episode 2, it felt like it was confined to rooms. Here, we actually have a fairly large set towards the end of the film. In episode 2, the big large set was in the beginning. It was, Chinatown. Here it's at the end. Like the entire finale ends in this big Incan set. It's not as big as something he would make in like Metropolis, but it is fairly big. And so, it's just this back and forth about, I'm going to win. Oh, you're endangering my girl. Oh, there's suddenly a bunch of people fighting. And it's fun. It's thin. It's easily dismissed. The German critics at the time dismissed it completely because it was just sensationalist. And you know what? I don't disagree. It is purely sensationalist filmmaking. And I think it works moderately well. It's not good, but it has enough pieces that actually kind of connect well and enough production value to make it a solidly entertaining jaunt. Number 29 is Cloak and Dagger. This is Fritz Lang's very first post-World War II movie actually set in Europe. It was entirely filmed in Southern California, though. So it has an interesting quality to it, almost like he's coming home, even though he actually never left his new home of Southern California. It's the story of Professor Jessup, played by Gary Cooper. He is a nuclear scientist recruited by the OSS to go to Switzerland and try to recruit a Nazi scientist there to defect. It makes sense. If you're trying to recruit an elite scientist, you don't send a spy, you send someone that they can actually, relate to on a certain technical level. The problem is, Jessup never really feels like a scientist. He feels like a spy, pretty much from the beginning. He's suave, he's debonair, and he is effectively a fighting spy in terms of what he actually does. And I think it kind of undermines him as a character. He has this certain break with where he was before. Now, I think part of this break has to be blamed on the studio. The studio cut at least 20 minutes from the film because this was one of the very early films that viewed nuclear power as something dangerous, and they pulled it out. And apparently a large chunk of the film had to deal with that. I think the last act apparently dealt with something in a German concentration camp as well. And so I feel like a lot of what would have made Jessup an interesting character has been cut out because he is a nuclear scientist and the message was nuclear power is to be feared, and suddenly all of that's gone. We do get a bit of globe-trotting. He goes to Switzerland and he has to go to Italy. And it's in Italy where we get the best character in the film. It's Gina. She is a young woman who had to become a paisan because of fascist forces in Italy. And she is the only character that actually has any real interest in the film, and I feel like she should have been the main character. This wounded, guarded woman who is learning to open up to this attractive, tall American. The movie does have solid spy elements throughout that actually kind of help elevate it in terms of its own genre, and it is mildly entertaining that way. However, I feel like the cut 20 minutes really does hurt the film. It hurts its main character. The main character, like suddenly becoming a super spy, I think it just kind of is a little too much. And I want Gina to be the main character. Overall, it's okay. It's an okay spy adventure. I just feel like it's the 20 minutes really do hurt the film that's been gone, and it doesn't quite connect and feel as real as it probably should, real on an emotional level. So I end up mixed on the film, but it's sort of okay as it stands. Number 28 is Beyond a Reasonable Doubt. This is Fritz Lang's very last Hollywood film. And I I'm surprisingly okay with it. I don't think it quite works. It's really hampered by the fact that Dana Andrews, again, is the main character, and he is an awful actor. He has to be worked specifically with Otto Preminger or William Wyler to be pretty good. Fritz Lang had no idea how to direct him. And the ending is a kind of a complete mess. So it's the story of a newspaperman who is out to end the death penalty. And he decides that the only way to do it is to create a situation where someone gets sentenced to death for a crime they didn't commit, but then they can prove beyond a reasonable doubt outside of the courtroom that the guy didn't do it. And so he recruits his potential son-in-law, Tom, played by Dana Andrews, to be the patsy. He is going to frame him for a murder he didn't commit. And so they find a murder, an unsolvable murder the next day, and they plant evidence that Tom did it. However, this is not actually an issue movie at all. It uses the death penalty as a MacGuffin for an excuse in order to actually build tension. And I think this is where the film works best. It is just this very tense look at a situation going awry and needing to come up with new explanations, ultimately trying to prove to the police that, yes, I framed myself. It's an interesting concept. However, that ends up falling apart in the end when the ending is just this tug of back and forth of revelations that just ends up going beyond credulity, and the movie kind of, it doesn't quite fall apart, but it cannot hold together at that level. It's a frustrating ending when something a bit cleaner and clearer would have really helped. It's also hindered by the fact that Fritz Lang seems to have this really optimistic view of the American press that it is obsessed with objectivity. I mean, this is within living memory before broadcast licenses, when newspapers were really just all about, trying to outdo each other in terms of sensationalism. The press has never been about objectivity. They've always been about trying to push different causes based on who's editing and owning the paper. Citizen Kane is kind of a closer look at what newspaper is actually like. And I think it undermines the film a good bit, but ultimately it's kind of a side issue. The real problem is the fact that Dana Andrews is a black hole of charisma, and the actual ending is just overstuffed and it doesn't actually work. Number 27 is The Blue Gardenia. This is a movie I feel bad for not liking more. I want to like it a lot more. It does a lot right, but then it does things that just ping me as dishonest narratively. It irritates me. It's the story of Nora, played by Anne Baxter. She is tied to her man who is off fighting in Korea. She has a night off. She opens her letter from him, and he's leaving her for a woman he met there. And so she goes out on a bender. She meets Harry, played by Raymond Burr, and he takes her back to her apartment, to his apartment, and he gets a little too handsy. She hits him on the head with a fire poker, and she passes out. She wakes up, and he's dead. And so she runs away, and she tries to, cover up the fact that she was there while she tries to piece together what actually happened that night. This stuff is surprisingly good and really solid. I was really, really enjoying this film. And then two things happen a bit later in the film that kind of undermine everything. So Nora has a couple of roommates, Sally and Celia, and she has a great moment with Celia that it feels like it's going to be this wonderful emotional moment where Nora kind of lets out everything that she's been building up internally and not been able to actually express. But the scene suddenly cuts short. I feel like there's more to the scene that just got cut out for the runtime, and I really feel like what was cut out was going to be this sort of highly emotional moment between friends, as Nora actually gets a nice moment, and I feel like the film suffers for that. And then late, we have the reveal of what actually happened. It involves the introduction of a new character. And I was really happy as it started, because everything, in terms of its mechanics, in terms of how things actually played out, it felt like it had been laid out from the beginning and it wasn't just completely out of left field. But then as the scene goes on, I was becoming more dissatisfied because I really felt like this new character who was introduced late is being shortchanged by the fact that she hasn't been introduced until like 90% of the way through the film. I really feel like there is a second film missing here, that we need dual narratives operating in conjunction with each other as we're marching our way towards an ending. And I feel like we were denied that in order to have, an unpredictable ending. And so, we sacrificed narrative like depth and breadth for tricking the audience, and that always irritates me. So I appreciate the mechanics of it. I get really irritated by the fact that I feel like we've been lied to, and I really feel like there's an emotional level that's absent. So I want to like this more than I do, but I can't. It ends up okay. I admire it slightly, but I'm ultimately just kind of frustrated by it. Number 26 is Liliom. When Fritz Lang first left Germany, he had a little time in France, and there his producer set up two productions. One was this, another one was for Max Ophüls. And Ophüls would often say later that he felt like the producer had switched up the productions, that Ophüls should have directed this one and Lang should have directed the other. And having seen a few of Ophüls' films, things like Madame D, I really feel like Ophüls had a point. This does actually fit Ophüls' kind of overall filmography a bit easier. This really does stand out as something a bit more ethereal and almost optimistic, as opposed to the rest of Lang's work. It would actually fit more easily in like the Archer's body of work. It's the story of our titular Liliom. He is a carnival worker and he gets fired from his job, and he is attached to Julie, this innocent girl who brings him home. And her aunt hates him, he becomes a layabout, and he actually has to do something, so he decides to go with a friend to try to rob 60,000 francs from a payroll. Everything goes wrong, and he's laying there dying. And there was controversy at the time, especially from the Catholic Church, which objected to its vision of heaven. And its vision of heaven is silly and kind of unserious, but entertainingly so. So I kind of like see the point, but at the same time, I'm like, it's amusing. And what the film is at its heart is the story of this young man who has to kind of make himself into a better person. And I actually think the work into it actually works fairly well. I think this movie is actually pretty good. It does end on a weird note where a female character completely justifies spousal abuse as long as it doesn't actually hurt, which feels like the words of a man who has beaten his wife and is justifying it. It's a really weird way to end the film. But overall, I think the film is good. The look at the carnival life, the characters as they're written, the entertaining look at heaven. I think it's an entertaining package overall that represents this weird transitional moment in Lang's professional life, where he had been cast himself out of Germany and he had no real home, and he still hadn't settled in America yet. It's an interesting historical footnote. I think it's a solidly good film on its own, but most people will only watch it because Lang made something kind of weird in the middle of his career. Number 25 is You and Me. This is a comedy drama, and I think the tones clash a good bit, but I don't think the film actually suffers for that, because it does end up leaning a bit more heavily towards the comedy, especially towards the end. So it's the story of an ex-con who works for a department store. The department store takes great pride in the fact that he hires ex-cons to work. There's no backsliding, and he's doing his good for these people. And George Raft is this ex-con, and he is near the end of his parole, and he plans on going to California. He has developed a relationship with Sylvia Sidney, and the two are in love. And on his last night, they go out on the town. She does something impulsive and asks him to marry her, and they do. Problem is, Sidney is also an ex-con for a crime that's never actually explained. And part of her parole is that she can't marry. So they have to hide the fact that they're still married. And the distrust that ends up percolating up because of Sydney's lie about, why they can't get married, ends up feeding Raph's idea that he can get back into, the life of crime. And so being in a group of employees of ex-cons, he ends up deciding to be part of an effort to rob the department store. There is this great moment like halfway through with the reveal of the gang actually working there, and it is so different stylistically from the rest of the film that it just stands out like a sore thumb, but it's so good at the same time. It is this auditory, like rhythmic back and forth as they are reminiscing about life before, life in the clink, so to speak. And it's really, really good, but like nothing else in the movie is remotely like it. And it also kind of feels like you could remove it. It's weird. The movie ends up trending towards comedy towards the end, and I am fairly certain it's supposed to be funny, but only fairly certain. Sydney figures out what's going on, and she sits them down for a math lesson about how crime will not pay if they actually steal from the department store. It's really funny. And the movie ends with like a slapstick routine, which is like, okay. The dramatic side is how it treats its characters. It treats them seriously so that by the end, when we're doing all of this more comedic stuff, there's actually a bit more emotion running through it. The film is kind of this weird mesh of different stuff, but I end up on the film's side because I feel like in the end it barely holds together, but it does hold together. And that's because the mix is actually fairly well done in terms of what is dramatic, the characters, and what is comedy, the ending. I think it works decently well. It's far from my favorite Lang, but I think it's an entertaining little gem. Number 24 is You Only Live Once. This is the movie he made immediately after Fury, and it's interesting. I think the first 2/3 is really, really good, but the last third is really muddled in terms of what it means to what the film is trying to say overall. So it's the story of Jo, played by Sylvia Sidney. She is in love with Eddie, who is a client of her lawyer boss, who is at the end of his third stint in jail. They are planning on getting married. And the laws in this state, they never say which state, mean that after 4 arrests, he's going to jail for a long time. So he needs to keep things on the straight and level. And so the early parts are Eddie trying to keep it straight and level. However, everything is against them. They try to go to a hotel for the honeymoon, but then the woman who owns the hotel, Margaret Sullivan, the Wicked Witch to the West, finds out that he is an ex-con, and she kicks him out. He gets a job as a truck driver, but then he's an hour and a half late because he decided to take a detour to show Jo the house that he bought for her. And he's fired over the phone, and the guy who employs him is like gloating over him. So he's getting increasingly desperate. And then he is coincidentally in the area when a crime goes wrong where 6 people die, and he is picked up by authorities, and he is arrested and convicted for it. So all of this is like really solid character-based, issue-based stuff. I really, really, really like it. And then we get to the part where probably the Hays Code started cutting things out. He is going to be executed, but he gets like a reprieve, but then he like finds a gun in the isolation room. How did the gun get there? I don't know. It was probably part of the 14 minutes that were cut by the Hays office, probably implying that the prison system is corrupt, which you can't do. And then all of a sudden the movie becomes, like a Bonnie and Clyde thing. So Bonnie and Clyde, if we're in real life, had been a big newspaper item just a couple of years before the production of this film. And so this is obviously just kind of an effort to grasp onto that. And everything about the film had been this progression, this tragedy of a man who is innocent, who is trying to make his life better, being oppressed by society because they won't accept him. And then the ending is him just deciding to hold people up. He never kills anyone, but it suddenly is muddying the moral message of the film. You could potentially take it as, well, if you don't accept these people, they will succumb to this. But suddenly at the end, he's like going to heaven. It's muddled in the ending. That being said, the movie looks fantastic. It's his best looking movie since he like moved away from Germany. Like the escape scene is like all fog at night. It looks fantastic. I really like the film. I think its first 2/3 is like really, really solid. I don't hate the last third. I just feel like it muddles the overall moral message of the film. But I have a certain reservation about it. Let's just put it that way. Number 23 is Ministry of Fear. This is based on a Graham Greene novel, and both Lang and Graham Greene expressed disappointment in the final product. And I don't quite see it. I've never read the novel by Greene. I probably should at some point. But this is an effective kind of counter Hitchcock suspense thriller. And I think it works pretty well. I don't think it works great, but I do think it works pretty well. Ray Milland plays a man who's just fresh out of an insane asylum during World War II, and he decides to kind of release himself by going to a countryside fete where he is given the secret information about the weight of a cake, and he uses that secret information to win the cake, but he wasn't supposed to be the person to receive that information, and so there's this back and forth about, oh, can I have it? No, I won this, it's mine. And then there's a robbing, and then there's a bombing, and it's like, it's this weird sense of unreality that Lang actually really does succeed in building over the course of pretty much the first 2/3 of the film. This is one of those films where, is the main character sane or is he not? And I was reminded of the much, much later Martin Scorsese film, Shutter Island, where it does kind of strike that balance, but then it moves to one very solid side of, is he sane or not? And most movies within this context always fall into, yes, he's actually sane, and this one does it. And I always feel like it kind of robs the final act of any real like reason to have like invested in the first 2/3. It's weird. There's this great seance scene like halfway through the film where he's trying to meet someone that he met at the fete, but it's not the same person, and then someone gets shot, but he has a loaded gun in his pocket, and it's really solid. However, Graham Greene was very much anti-Hitchcock. He was a film critic for a time when Alfred Hitchcock was releasing movies in England and working in England, and those reviews are always just like completely dismissive of the clockwork nature of how Hitchcock played things out. And so what you have here is a more realistic ending, and it just doesn't excite as much as something like an Alfred Hitchcock would have built. It essentially ends up being two men wrestling in a room instead of some like big set piece, which would have been exciting. And so it's a bit of a letdown. However, I suspect that Lang's disappointment was based on the fact that his writer and producer were the same person. It's unusual to see a writer-producer. And so anything that Lang might have wanted to change, the writer who is also his producer, largely refused. That being said, the film actually looks really good and the most like a Lang movie since he left Germany. It's the slightly unrealistic sets, it's the use of shadows, it's the occasional roving camera. It's, he'd been using it piecemeal here and there throughout his early American period, but here everything seems to come together, and this is like the first Fritz Lang movie since he left Germany. I think it's pretty good. I kind of wish it ended on a bit more of a high note, but it is still an effective little mystery suspense thriller that works decently well and looks good from beginning to end. Number 22 is The Tiger of Eshnapur. When Fritz Lang was finished with his American career, he took an offer from a German producer to make a German film in India, and this was it. This is the first part of a 2-part film. The other part is the Indian temple, and we'll talk about that in just a second. The Tiger of Eshnapur is an adventure story. Fritz Lang would later dismiss it completely as just sugar, but you know what? Sugar is fun sometimes, and this is fun. The pair of movies, which are pretty much of equal quality, are just a fun adventure story. They center around a German architect named Harold. He has been hired by the Maharaja of Eshnapur in order to build Western-style buildings because of his love of Europe. And Harold ends up in this big adventure tied with Sita, a dancer. He convinces Sita that she was actually of European heritage, you know, she's got blue eyes, and they end up having to like escape, essentially. And there are just a bunch of little, you know, adventure episodes in which to operate. And the film is bright and colorful and energetic, and he's just running through it. And you know what? It's fun. You know, it's just, we have a series of obstacles and we need to get over it, and we have very clear character archetypes in which to follow. And it works decently well. This was also apparently a big inspiration for both Spielberg and Lucas when they were creating Indiana Jones. There's actually a scene where Harold is in a white tuxedo, the exact same kind of tuxedo that Indiana Jones wears in the Temple of Doom, the Indiana Jones movie set in India. So it's like the coincidence is not a coincidence, it's definitely inspiration. The film is just a fun adventure movie. I really feel like Fritz Lang probably should have started making this kind of movie when he first moved to America. He shouldn't have been trying to make the hard edge stuff that's a harder sell. He should have entered himself into a new country's film industry and said, all right, I'm going to prove myself here by making some money first. Instead, he went his social justice path, and it just kind of slowly degraded. The movie is fun. It's not challenging. It is pure sugar, but it's fun. Number 21 is The Indian Tomb. So Harold and Sita are on the run from the Maharaja, and they escape into a cave, and the god Shiva builds a web to protect them from chase. So is the god influencing all these events? No, it never comes up again. This is not a movie concerned with kind of building escalating ideas. This is a movie concerned with just continuing adventure on pretty much the same scale. And it ultimately is a little frustrating because I felt like it had the pieces to create this sort of grand adventure by the end, where a bunch of plot lines would be intertwining at the same times towards the end, kind of feeding each other and building and building and building. But they end up just kind of happening next to each other. So, so Harold and Sita end up captured, and they end up in the dungeons. However, Harold's sister Irene and her husband Walter is actually the chief architect under the Maharaja. They end up part of a bunch of palace intrigue centered around a potential revolution against the Maharaja. And so we have these different stories that could have, like, intersected and stuff, like Sita being like a key figure that is necessary for the revolution, and the revolution helping the Harold in order to do, but everything just kind of happens at the same time. It's a little frustrating. And on top of that, there's a big action sequence towards the end, which just feels lazily filmed, just like set up a camera, have a bunch of stuff happen. It's mercifully short, but it did remind me of how John Carpenter had kind of given up by Ghost of Mars, and the action scenes are like kind of dull. And so the film is just really a continuation of the adventure. The palace intrigue has its benefits. The stuff in the catacombs and stuff is fun and colorful. I really feel like there should have been this intertwining of stuff in order to actually build something even bigger, but we don't get that. What we get is modest in ambition and moderately entertaining, and it's fun. I think it's the better of the two. It's a bit more exciting ever so slightly, but it's ultimately just kind of a continuation instead of an escalation, and I was hoping for an escalation. Number 20 is Hangmen Also Die. This is a lesser form of Fritz Lang's earlier M. It's a procedural about trying to catch a killer, but it introduces certain melodramatic elements that don't really work. And there is a treatment of the kind of the Czech populace, the movie is set in the Czech Republic, that ultimately feels kind of convenient and unconvincing. It's overall a good film, but these are the elements that kind of hold it back from being at the same level of M. So it's the story of the Czech resistance during World War II. The leader of the German Nazi party in Czechoslovakia is murdered, and the guy who murdered him, a guy named Dr. Svoboda, is on the run. And the Germans, in response, take up 400 men and say the person who killed the leader of the party gives himself up, or we kill these 400 men. And so the movie is at its best when it's kind of wrestling with these moral questions. You know, what is the responsibility of the man who did the killing to the 400 men? What did the 400 men have to sacrifice in order for the advancement of the liberty of their own country? It's all really interesting stuff. However, what kind of undermines it slightly, I think the movie's good, is that there is this melodramatic element where Svoboda ends up meeting up with Masha, who's a woman, and her husband is caught up in the 400. However, they meet up because he coincidentally went into her house to hide from some bombing, and then it's like the suspicion around it, and then the coincidence of having picked up her husband. The way it actually works in the film, it feels coincidental, and I don't really, it feeds this sense of melodrama that I don't think the film is really built for. This is more of a procedural than something melodramatic, and I think that undermines it. There are plot elements late where, you know, the pressure, the noose around the Czech people and the resistance is tightening. And so the Czech people, who are early viewed as some sort of monolithic force, they're like a Nazi officer gets punched in the face in a theater, and then everyone just kind of filters out so no one can be a witness to the crime. Late in the film, they end up splitting because of the presence of the assassin in their midst, who they don't know. But then they all end up like coalescing in the end anyway. And it just feels kind of convenient. However, the actual pursuit of the killer is solid and good and tense and wonderful. It's just all of these extra elements that feel like necessary additions from Hollywood kind of suppress the quality of the film. Everyone except the German characters speak in American accents, and I am completely fine with it because listening to them talk in funny fake Czech accents would be stupid. The film is good. It is solidly good, but it is kind of the lesser cousin to M. Number 19 is Rancho Notorious. For a good length of this film, I was convinced I was getting something really, really special. And the film kind of ends more generically in terms of its genre, and I was a little disappointed. The movie didn't give me what I thought it was promising me. It's the story of Vern. He has witnessed the rape and murder of his wife by a bandit, and he is in pursuit of the bandit. And the trail of clues he finds leads him to a few words. One is Chuck-a-Luck. I had no idea what the Chuck-a-Luck game was, so I was right along with him for the journey. And the other is Keen. Keen ends up being the woman played by Marlene Dietrich, who runs Rancho Notorious, which is this ranch on the outskirts of a small town where essentially criminal elements come to survive. There's a small subplot about a populist election in the small town trying to drive out some corrupt officials. And everything about this time feels like this series of thematic ideas that are coalescing into something really interesting. Vern and Keen are both non-criminals stuck in this criminal world, and kind of the corruption, election stuff seems to be feeding into this idea of trying to like push out badness. And so I was really getting this sense that Vern and Keen would end up kind of driving the last, acts of the film as Vern has to let go of the revenge he'll never get, and he has to find a way forward. However, the movie is not interested in that. It is interested ultimately in genre thrills, and it delivers fine. Fritz Lang was very good at shooting gun battles, and the gun battles here where Vern has to steadily learn which of the bandits is the man who murdered his wife, and the bandit at the same time is doing his own little investigation in who Vern is and why he's there, and suddenly it escalates into shoots-outs. And it's amusing, it's fun. I just feel like there was a promise implicit in the first like 2/3 of the film that the film kind of sidesteps. There's also an interesting little irony here. Marlene Dietrich is playing an older character, and so she should look older, and she was older at the time, but she still insisted on looking as young as humanly possible. So it's just, she should look like she's in her 50s, but she looks like she's in her late 40s pretending to be in her 30s. It's kind of interesting. I think the film is solid and good. I think it's an interesting little find. I appreciate it for what it is, but I kind of wish the promise of the early parts had played out differently. Number 18 is Manhunt. This is very obviously an attempt to ape Alfred Hitchcock. I'm pretty sure it was made in response to Foreign Correspondent. And it is a solid thriller. It's far from perfect, but it is a very solid thriller. So Walter Pidgeon plays Thorndyke. He is kind of an upper-class Britishman who is in Germany doing what he calls a sporting stalk. He goes out with his gun and he just makes it so that he can get an animal in his sight. Except he's not doing it with an animal, he's doing it with Adolf Hitler. He gets Hitler in his sight, he's satisfied, and then he suddenly decides to load a round into his rifle, and then he's caught by Nazis. And he is interrogated by George Sanders, the chief Nazi officer. And he is convinced that Thorndyke was sent there by the British government to kill Hitler. And this is pre-war, so this is just before the invasion of Poland. And Sanders will not take Thorndyke's explanation. He takes him up and he pushes him off the cliff. Why doesn't he just kill him? Because Thorndyke is brother to a British lord. So you can't just shoot a brother of a British lord. However, Thorndyke survives. He crawls his way to England. He gets on a boat. Roddy McDowall has a tiny little scene. And, he ends up, the only solution is to continue to run because the entire situation is so messy. And Sanders figures out that he's still alive and he pursues him. And there's this great ending where, Thorndyke is hiding in a cave and he has to makeshift a window and he uses bow and arrow, and it's wonderful. Where the film falters is in two spots. There is a love affair that dominates like a 15-20 minute section near the middle of the film. It's like the thriller stops to have a romance. I think actually piecing this out a bit better across the film, like instead of meeting Roddy McDowall, he meets his love interest on the boat, that sort of thing. And the other thing is, like, the last few minutes is pure agitprop about trying to convince America to go to war. This was released after the start of the conflict and before Pearl Harbor. So this was an effort to try to, get America in. And it does not work outside of the moment. And it was probably a little cringy in the moment. However, overall, the film is a solid, quality thriller from Lang. It's good stuff. It's not great stuff. It's not Hitchcock at his height. It's not Lang at his height. But it is a quality thriller. Number 17 is House by the River. Just tell a racy story. It's what the people want, is what Mrs. Ambrose tells Stephen late in the film. And you know what? That's all this really is. It's just a racy story. It's really well done, though. That being said, I do think the film is missing like its first 10 minutes. It feels like the first 10 minutes was just hard cut out of the film. There are character introductions that feel like things had previously been established. And yeah, there's a character who shows up like 20 minutes in who feels like she should have been in like the first scene. It's weird. I think I get the sense that this film was actually fairly heavily cut down, and I think that's what keeps it from being a great film. Instead, it's just a good, lurid little one. So it's the story of Stephen. He is a novelist of no renown at all. His lifestyle is propped up by his brother John. Stephen is married to Marjorie, and they have a maid named Emily. And Stephen decides to hit on her. She reacts badly, and he ends up accidentally murdering her and throwing her body in the river with the help of John, who, Stephen kind of guilts into helping him. And so the story ends up being Stephen suddenly being met with fame because he employed the girl who was found murdered, and then using that to try to boost up his own career by writing a novel about it. And so all of the elements of suspense are him getting closer to being pointed out for the crime and being pulled away from it. All while there is actually a very strong moral question going on, essentially around John. Stephen is a complete psychopath who is willing to use anyone to get what he wants. John is actually the moral guy. He gave up a bunch of money in order to help support his brother, and now he is going to be held accessory after the fact by helping his brother hide the body. So what is he going to do? And in the middle of this is Marjorie, who is trying to deal with the fact that she is increasingly repelled by her husband and attracted to her brother-in-law. This is quality stuff. The problem is it hits fairly shallow on an emotional level. The characters feel a little shortchanged. They're clear enough, but in terms of relationships, everything feels just a little too shallow to actually have a strong catharsis by the end, when we do eventually move into something like lurid thriller territory. The overall film is fun. It's a solid film. It's a solid gothic horror thriller. I think it's taking some of the kind of genre ideas that Lang was playing with in Secret Beyond the Door and just applies them a whole lot better. There's no Freudian analysis in this. It's solid. I think it's a bit of a lost gem. I think it's good. I think it's entertaining. It's not Lang's best film, but it is solidly good. Number 16 is The Thousand Eyes of Dr. Mabuse. This is the third of 3 movies that Fritz Lang made about the titular villain, Dr. Mabuse, and I think it's the least of the 3, but I really like it. It starts curiously. It starts with a scene that is essentially a repeat from the second movie. Someone driving in one car next to another and they get shot and then the car drives away and it blocks traffic. Is this going to be like a weird remake? Instead, what we get is a continuation. It very much is a continuation. It doesn't like retcon everything so that like Dr. Mabuse was born in the 40s instead of like the 1880s, or that he never actually died. It is a complete continuation that respects everything that came before it. And what's happening is that people are recreating famous crimes by Dr. Mabuse. And this brings everything to the attention of Inspector Cross, who ends up focusing in on the Luxor Hotel. And what he finds at the Luxor Hotel is essentially a haunted house. It was born in 1944 under Nazi rule, and it's never been able to shake it. It was built as a diplomatic hotel, so it's full of spy equipment. And there is a blind man who seems to have psychic power over what everyone can do. And what this film is most compelling at is when it is using the entire situation as an excuse to explore the subtext of how Germany is failing to move on from its past, about how it's kind of trapped by its past. You know, the Luxor Hotel operates as a sort of symbol of what the film, of what Germany can't escape. And it's really interesting stuff. However, that being said, there is an overarching plot to everything, but it doesn't actually become remotely clear until like the last 15 minutes. I strongly suspect this movie will work better on rewatches, as everything just kind of like comes together a bit more clearly in my head. The other thing is there's a small romantic subplot that feels like a waste of space. It's kind of not terribly compelling and doesn't have much to do with anything else. The overall film is solidly good. It is a really interesting continuation of the previous story, an interesting look at kind of an insider-outsider look at what Germany is, since, you know, Lang was from Germany. Well, he was born in Vienna, but still, he spent his young adult life in Germany and then he fled and now he's back and he's looking at Germany as it is now. It's interesting that way. And like the procedural element, there are some wonderful moments of like technological observation that feel straight out of De Palma and are actually really, really creepy. Just kind of a pullback from a TV screen to reveal recording equipment. It's great. It's kind of great. I do wish the plot was a bit clearer throughout and that the romance either was integrated better or just cut out. Still, it's solidly good. Number 15 is Dr. Mabuse. This is the very first cinematic adaptation of the character of Dr. Mabuse, and it's a legacy that actually continues until fairly recently. I'm pretty sure Germany's still making Dr. Mabuse movies. This is often held up as one of Fritz Lang's silent masterpieces, and I don't quite fit there. There are some things that hold me back. I do think it is a good, very long thriller. It's 4.5 hours long. It's actually built into 2 parts, but you consider this one as a cohesive whole because it is just one sustained story. And I think it is good. What holds me back is there are some character elements that I feel are either underexplained or don't quite make sense, or just outright thin, that limit my enjoyment, especially towards the end. So Dr. Mabuse, he's essentially Moriarty. He is the preeminent, shadowy criminal mastermind of Weimar, Germany. And the opening prologue is a real doozy. He is orchestrating the stealing of a paper from a train while he is in the stock market, taking advantage of news coming in that it's been stolen and then returned in order to take advantage of massive dips in the stock market, which he buys, and then watching the value of it explode. It's got some weird stuff in there, like, you know, throwing the paper outside the window of a moving train perfectly into the back of a car that's moving perpendicular to it underneath a bridge, but it's fine. The bulk of the film is really about Dr. Mabuse just trying to manipulate people, and the investigation led by the Inspector Van Weck. Van Weck is policeman. That's kind of all he is. I find him to be a deeply unsatisfying antagonist to Dr. Mabuse. Mabuse is great. He's intelligent, he's domineering, he actually has a bit of character to him. I love him. But when his antagonist is really just policeman, I'm disappointed. The other problem on the character front are two women. One is the Contessa. This is a woman that Dr. Mabuse manipulates, well, especially her husband. He manipulates and kidnaps her and is like domineering over her. There's introductory text and the second part that claims that he's in love with her, but I never see it at all. It could be that he's in love with her, but he has absolutely no way of showing it other than domineering control. But the movie is completely uninterested in exploring that as part of a character. The other is Clara. She is a girl who is in love with Dr. Mabuse, and I don't see why she is. Their relationship is not like shortchanged or anything. I just don't think the level of adulation she feels towards him makes much sense. However, the film is really good when it is really focused on the police procedural stuff. There's a certain presaging how great the procedural is in M here, and I really feel like this is where the movie shines at its brightest. It's very, very, very good. I just find the inconsistencies around the character to hold me back towards the end when it's asking me for some level of catharsis. Dr. Mabuse is a great cinematic creation, but when everyone else around him just doesn't quite fit as well as I think it should, it undermines my emotional investment to a degree. Still, film is good. It is 4.5 hours long, it looks fantastic from beginning to end, and it is good. Number 14 is The Testament of Dr. Mabuse. I really like this film. It's actually stuck with me surprisingly strongly over the years. I really, really like it. I don't think it quite comes together as well as it could have, and I think the problem is the film is caught between being a fairly obvious subtextual look at the rise of terrorism and violence through Nazi Germany, and the fact that it ultimately just kind of wants to be a thriller at the same time. I don't think it really connects the two, and I think it ultimately drops the interesting subtext by the end, which I find frustrating. Anyway, so Dr. Mabuse has been captured after he went insane at the end of the first film, and he is catatonic, but legibly writing very coherent and detailed plans of crimes. And these crimes are happening. Oh my gosh, how on earth could this be happening? There's no way that the guy in charge of his mental well-being is responsible for this, is there? Yes, Baum, the guy, is completely responsible. There's no real mystery there. It kind of holds on to the idea that there's a mystery, but it's not really much of a mystery. However, there's this wonderful creepy moment where we realize it's a bit more than just, oh, these are great ideas, let's do them. It's literal possession, and the way it's actually shown is ghostly and surrealistic and wonderful, and I love it. So it's the story of just the investigation of these crimes, trying to zero in on how Mabuse is managing all of this, even though he's just kind of in a mental asylum, not able to contact anyone. And it works. It's just, it is this investigation that keeps going, pursuing, jewel thieves, and then eventually murderers, and eventually everything kind of coalescing into one exciting thriller package by the end. And by the end, it has kind of forgotten the fact that it was this metaphor about the downfall of Germany at the hand of the rising Nazi party. I find that a little frustrating. That being said, there is an interesting kind of meta element to this. According to the biography written by Joseph McBride about Billy Wilder was working at the same movie studio in Germany as Lang at the same time. The studio UFA was very much preferring light, frothy affair in order to try to help people's mood in the country that was kind of entering into a state of terrorism that was going to lead to the rise of the Nazi party. And here is the Testament of Dr. Mabuse, which is not that at all. It's kind of downbeat. The ending ends with the good guys winning, but it doesn't really end with the defeat of Mabuse. It ends with Mabuse essentially entering hibernation to rise again later. It's the good guys win, but it's weirdly downbeat at the same time. I really like the film. I think it's the best of the 3 Mabuse movies that Fritz Lang made. I think they're all roughly equal in quality, but I think this one is just slightly more interesting because of the immediacy around the early parts of the metaphor. I am disappointed it kind of drops it by the end, but ultimately I think the film is a quality thriller. Number 13 is Clash by Night. Now, if you look at the poster, this looks like it's going to be some sort of high-strung melodrama, but it's really not. It's actually a surprisingly restrained drama. It's just a straight drama. This is apparently a vehicle for Barbara Stanwyck. She really pushed to have it made for a long time, and Fritz Lang got the assignment, and he makes it as visually interesting as he possibly can, and he does that very well. But ultimately, it's in the service of a very strong character-based story. Stanwyck plays May. She comes from this small seaside town that the entire movie is based in, and she's been gone for 10 years. She never really says why she came back. There are implications that a man left her with no money and she has no other choice. May comes back to live with Joe, her younger brother, and then she meets Jerry and his girl Peggy. Peggy is played by Marilyn Monroe. And the core of the film is the fact that May is at war with herself. She is a woman who feels like she should like the quiet life, living with a man, having the same old every day, but she can't deny the fact that she needs more excitement in her life. And into this comes Earl. And Earl is exciting. He's the kind of butch man that she really wants. However, she ends up finding out that he's married with a girl half a world away, and so she decides to settle down with Jerry. A year or two passes, they have a daughter, Gloria, and then everything kind of bubbles up. And it really is centered on May as this central character. And it really makes sense why Stanwyck would pursue the role, because it is that sort of meaty character that actors just really strive for, really desire. I have a couple small issues with the film. The baby Gloria is the quietest, most convenient baby I have ever seen, always sleeping during major fights. And there are a lot of major fights in the last half of the film. The other thing is the very end resolution. It feels really nice, but I ultimately feel like it robs Jerry of any real agency, of any real growth. And I find it a little off-putting. It's nice. It's nice to see the resolution, but ultimately I'm not sure if it's the right ending for Jerry, kind of robbing him of actually becoming a better person. So it is really good. It is all drama. It's all acting. Everyone is very, very good. Yes, including Marilyn Monroe. She has a very good small role. But this is Stanwyck's show, and she is great. She shows off the fact that she is a very good actress. And you know what? The end result is very good. It's very atypical Lang, but you know what? It's still very good Lang. Number 12 is the first part of the 2-part saga Die Niebelungun, Siegfried. This is based on an old German poem. It's essentially German myth and folktale and legend all rolled up into one, about the hero Siegfried, who wins the treasure of Niebelungun, who crafts the perfect weapon, who fights a dragon, who uses a magic helmet to make himself invisible and disguise himself in order to win the heart of the most beautiful woman in the country, Kriemhild, and he has to use his powers in order to convince a captive warrior princess to marry Kriemhild's brother, so that Kriemhild's brother will guarantee that Kriemhild and Siegfried can marry. It is grand fantasy adventure stuff, and I find it completely infectious. It is very fun. It is very open about just being a grand fantasy adventure, and it is helped in no small part by the scale of the physical production. Metropolis gets all of the attention for the scale of the physical production that Lang could command in silent era Germany, but I think the two-parter, Die Niebelungun, is the real crown jewel, especially here. The second part is mostly centered around a particular location. This one is as globe-trotting as you can get in medieval fantasy adventure. It's rolling hills, it's rigid giant castles. It's just there's a giant dragon. There's the special effects around turning invisible. There's a lot of political intrigue, and in the end, there's tragedy. This is just kind of the old tale of Die Niebelungen, of Siegfried. They actually give away the ending on the poster. It's like the only image on the poster. Everyone knows where this is going. Siegfried is going to die by a spear through the back. And the tragedy of it all is not just that Siegfried died. It's that Siegfried and Kriemhild are like the only two good people in this entire story. And Kriemhild can't see past the deception around her, and that it leads to her beloved's death is the great tragedy of it all. Not that Siegfried died, but that the system around them kind of manipulated them into this. It is a wonderful adventure with a very sad ending. I think it's a little weird in the beginning, the fight with the dragon. The dragon looks innocent, just the actual giant puppet that they use. It looks so innocent, and Siegfried just kind of happens upon it and kills it. I kind of feel sad for the dragon. But other than that, the movie's just a grand fantasy adventure. It doesn't ask much, honestly, and you know what? It excels at what it does. Number 11 is The Woman in the Window. This movie is one of those foundational films of the film noir genre. It came out the same year as Double Indemnity by Billy Wilder, and it really set the stage for a lot of the noir that was to come. It's the story of Edward G. Robinson. He plays a philosophy professor. He's a middle-aged man, and his family has gone off to the country for a few weeks, leaving him alone in the city. And he and his friends, including the district attorney, just kind of hang out in their club talking about the mysterious portrait of a woman in the window next door. And then outside the club, he meets the woman. He has an innocent drink with her. He goes up to her apartment to look at the initial sketches, and then her boyfriend barges in, and Robinson kills him. It's totally in self-defense, but what ends up following is really interesting because it's a combination of he can't go to the police because it looks really bad, and being a philosophy professor who talks about murder all the time, he feels like he's smart enough to actually outwit the police. And it's a wonderful combination, wonderfully played by Robinson himself. Robinson was just this wonderful actor in the 30s and 40s and into the 50s. And he plays these moments where he's up against the DA, played by Raymond Massey, and it's just the way he's digging at questions while thinking himself superior is wonderful to watch. It's interesting to watch this decades later when CSI has been a thing forever, and you're looking at little things that he forgot, and you're wondering how on earth could he forget that? He tears his shirt, his coat on something in Joan Bennett's apartment, and it's why would you leave the fiber if you're so smart about this? But it's fine. The pacing of it is a little slower than we might expect, but it's really all about creating this sense of a noose around his neck as the investigation goes on, and he has to kind of make up for forgotten things. He has to try to cover his tracks. The film ends curiously. I ultimately like how it ends, I do, but what I find interesting is that it goes all the way in one particular tone and then whiplashes back to another tone that makes it more comic in nature. I think it's funny, I think it works, and I think it shifts the point of the film from something like a cautionary tale to something along those lines, but funnier. I like it. It's fun. The film overall is really just kind of this fun, tense, well acted, very good looking, especially in Joan Bennett's apartment. There are a lot of mirrors. Fritz Lang did great things with mirrors. And it's just a really fun little movie. It presages a lot of what came in film noir, and it does it very well. Number 10 is Metropolis. This is one of the titans of the silent era. If you only know one silent film, it's probably this. Well, it's this or like a random Charlie Chaplin movie. This film is a magnificent physical achievement. It's actually a surprisingly compelling human story at the same time. I just have an issue with one character. I don't think he makes sense. I do wonder if some of the remaining missing footage, if it ever came back, would actually like answer the questions I have about him. But ultimately, the version we have now does not include those answers. And so all I have is this guy who is a linchpin for most of the film's back half doesn't make the most sense. So it's the story of Metropolis, a giant futuristic city that is on top. It is the elite. On the bottom, in the slums underneath the ground, are the lower classes who make all the machines work. And the center of the story is Freder. He's the prince of the city. His father Yo is the leader of the city of some kind. And Freder decides that he's going to switch places with a worker and figure out what it's like down below. And the 10-hour shift nearly breaks him, and then he tries to create a mediation between the two. Concurrently, there is a young woman named Maria. She is of the lower classes, and she is trying to preach the moderation between the classes. And things stop making the most sense when Yo approaches Rotwang. Rotwang is the famous doctor. He's got the black glove on one hand like Dr. Strangelove, and he creates the Machine Man. The Machine Man he makes look like Maria. And Yo's order is all about destroying Maria. And it literally doesn't make sense to me because she's preaching like nonviolence and cooperation, and the lower classes are being like kept down in no small part because of her. And so Yo like ordering her to become a rabble rouser is essentially what she does. I mean, is he trying to crush the lower classes from the beginning? It doesn't really make sense. I find it weird. However, Yo really is kind of a minor character in the whole thing. It's just his decisions are this linchpin upon the second half. And what the second half is just spectacle. It is human-based spectacle. We love Freder, we love Maria, and they have to fight, the robot version of Maria. The performance from Maria on both ends is remarkable because she can just, hold herself differently and completely sell it. Things go like real big. There's a giant flood. The sets are huge and they actually get flooded. And ultimately, in the end, it's all about, the head and the hand must have the mediator of the heart. Again, it's not very Lang. It's apparently much more Thea Van Harber than Lang. But you know what? It is the famous ending, so it is what it is. I mean, I don't mind the ending. It's heartwarming and nice. It's a nice message from a movie. My only real issue is Yo himself. I really wish his motivation was clearer. Number 9 is Woman in the Moon. This is a combination of melodrama, spy movie, hard sci-fi movie, and space fantasy movie all rolled into one. And I really think it works. I find it really fun. So it's ultimately the story about how Germany conquers the moon because a man gets jilted by a girl. Wolf loves Frida. Frida is going to marry someone else, so Wolf decides to go to meet his old professor Hans and build the rocket that will prove his theory correct, that the moon is full of gold. And the entire enterprise is at stake because the world's largest gold producers, owners, miners, get together and realize that if there's a sudden influx of a giant quantity of gold that they don't control, then they need to control it if they can't destroy the entire mission. So they send Turner. Turner is kind of a spy type figure. And all of this stuff early, does this movie need to be a spy movie for its first hour? This movie's 3 hours long. Does it need to be a spy movie? I don't know about needs, but it does it effectively well. It's fun. This is easily the best spy stuff that Fritz Lang ever made. And this is the movie he made immediately after Spies, a movie that I struggle with. So it's building the rocket, it's launching the rocket, and then it's getting to the moon and realizing there's breathable atmosphere and open water. I don't know what scientist in the 1920s thought there might be breathable atmosphere on the moon, but they were probably cranks. Still, that's part of the appeal of the film, because everything about the construction of the rocket itself is surprisingly forward-looking. It's constructed in a very tall warehouse, it's multi-stage, it has G-force, and yet that gets combined with sillier stuff like the seats that the astronauts are inside are just cots, you know, where they have to like reach up to try to touch buttons and stuff. It's silly. And at the same time, they're dressed like they're Charles Lindbergh flying over the Atlantic. So it's this combination of surprisingly forward-looking and also kind of like unable to look ahead at the same time. The story itself is just, you know, it shifts from genre to genre, but the shifts never feel like whiplash or anything. They're actually surprisingly cohesive as we keep going. And it ends in this wonderful space where our hero has to be heroic in order to save the day. And it's really satisfying to watch. It's self-sacrificed at like the grandest of scales. This movie is really fun. It is one of the heights of Fritz Lang's entire silent period, and it's honestly one of the heights of his entire body of work. Number 8 is Human Desire. There's an amusing little story about Fritz Lang objecting to this title, because what other kind of desire is there other than human desire? Based on the novel La Bête Humaine by Émile Zola, which was previously adapted into a French film directed by Jean Renoir, which is also a very good movie. I find Human Desire to be one of the most underappreciated films that Fritz Lang ever made. It is a complex psychological drama and noir about a woman who is caught in an impossible situation. It's the story of Glenn Ford. He plays a Korean war vet who comes home and he works in a railroad station. He is a railroad engineer. And he, through coincidence, meets Gloria Graham. Gloria Graham is married to Broderick Crawford. Broderick Crawford is a domineering personality who threatens her with abuse because of a supposed affair that she has with a man named Owens. Someone is killed, and Glenn Ford ends up being this sympathetic figure to her, and it seems to open up something within her about getting Glenn Ford to work with her to kill Broderick Crawford. Now, reviews at the time were dismissive of the film, saying that everyone was unsympathetic, and I find that to be deeply unfair to Gloria Graham in particular as an actress. She is very, very good here, and I think she gives her character a wonderful level of humanity and complexity as she finds herself in this impossible situation where no one will believe anything she says about anything, and yet here is this good man, perhaps the only man who could physically match up to her husband, who is just offering her some kind of sympathy. And what does she do to try to extricate herself out of this situation? If this movie were made today, it would be called the deconstruction of the genre, and it would be called the creation of a femme fatale. And I think that's all kind of fair to what the film is. It is taking, you know, essentially what a femme fatale is when we first meet them in any sort of noir, and it's giving them a level of human dimension that we almost never get in these sorts of films. I think is wonderful. I think Gloria Graham is the complete emotional center to this because she gives her character such warmth and such pain and such humanity, so that as she's going through the motions of what she's going to do regarding her husband and this nice Korean war vet, it doesn't feel like it's conniving a forethought. It doesn't feel like it's just an effort for her to be evil. It feels like a woman trapped in a situation just reaching out for anything that will help get her out. And I really think it is a kind of a triumph of film noir filmmaking, even though it sort of stands apart slightly. I think it has been unfairly maligned since it was released. I mean, there are quotes all over the place about how it's just a waste of film, but no, this movie is high quality stuff from Lang. Number 7 is Western Union. Fritz Lang did a lot of mimicking of Alfred Hitchcock, but this is the one example where he mimics John Ford, and he does it very, very well. There is a lot of John Ford in this movie. It came out right after the release of Stagecoach, right after kind of the revival of the Western in 1939. And so what we have is male camaraderie, which was much more a John Ford thing, kind of a metaphor for the creation of the nation, which John Ford had done several times in things like Wagon Master and Drums Along the Mohawk, and a love of side characters. There are a bunch of little side characters who have kind of their own unique personalities. It all feels like Ford. However, at the same time, Fritz Lang's sense of justice runs through it, and there's an apocalyptic moment late in the film that is all Lang. So it's the story of Vance, played by Randolph Scott. Randolph Scott! He is on the run from the law. He makes friends with a Western Union representative or a worker named Edward. And then a year later, Edward is building the transcontinental telegraph line, and he hires Shaw to Vance to be to help advance the train through the countryside in order to actually lay down the telegraph. And then there's more, Edward has a sister named Sue, there's a love triangle with another character, and then outside of the party there is Slade, who is Vance's old buddy, who is kind of preying on the Western Union drive as it goes, and that's where the conflict ends up arising. The film ends up kind of episodic as it goes along. They deal with like stolen horses, they deal with, a drunken Indian, and everything kind of feels isolated, except that we have our connective tissue, which is everyone becoming friends because of these events. They kind of hang out at campfires and make fun of each other. There's the love triangle continues with Sue as she's kind of vying between the two of them. And it's surprisingly warm. And then we have this great apocalyptic ending, well, near ending, where Slade surrounds the Western Union group and burns the forest down. Everything burns, and I love it. But what really gives the movie its real power is its very ending. There's a resolution to all of the thread lines that is surprisingly touching and effective. This film is a small triumph. It's Lang mimicking Ford, but he's doing it very, very well while never quite losing sight of himself. This might be some kind of professional low for him because he's very much mimicking another filmmaker, but at the same time, he's doing what he can to push what he wants. The film is very much a lost gem. People kind of ignore it. Who watches Fritz Lang movies for Westerns? There's no way it could be any good. Yes, it is very good. This movie is very much worth your time. Number 6 is Scarlet Street. This is another adaptation of a French novel, this time La Chienne, which was also previously adapted by Jean Renoir. It tells the story of Chris, played by Edward G. Robinson. He is a little man who has a little job at a bank, and he's married to a woman who deeply despises him, who happens to be a widow of a dead police officer. Chris even admits at one point he's never seen a woman naked, not even his wife. He is a sad little man, and into his life suddenly comes Joan Bennett. He's walking through the park one day. He has just received a gold watch for his 25-year anniversary at the bank, and he beats the man who is attacking her with his umbrella. And she sees this man in a nice suit with a gold watch and decides, I can con this man. And it turns out that she does. She and the man that Chris beat off, played by Dan Durea, are a couple, and they agree to just work together to con him for everything he has. And the film has an overall dramatic approach that makes it feel apart from what you'd kind of expect from a film noir. It's less lurid, it's less sensationalist. And what that allows the film is a greater sense of character, especially around Chris. Because Chris is on a path towards self-destruction. He is lying to himself, he is being lied to by everyone around him, so that when it comes time for him to make a fatal decision that completely unravels his life, it makes sense. This isn't just like an older man being smitten by a younger woman. This is a man who completely believes the idea that this younger woman loves him. There's extra stuff in there. So he's a painter on the weekend. She thinks he's a great painter based on their conversation. They try to steal his paintings and sell them, but no one will buy them until an art critic comes along and says he likes them, and then suddenly the paintings are worth a lot of money. But it's supposed to be Kitty who's drawing them based on what Dan DeRea has been saying. So, and Chris is fine with it because you know what? Joan Bennett, who's Kitty, is like, this will bring us closer together. He's finding reasons to lie to himself so that when it all collapses, it makes sense and it's tragic. I love this film. It's the most Fritz Lang film that Fritz Lang had made since he left Germany. Not quite his best film since then. Fury is great, but because of the compromised ending, this feels a bit more just purely Fritz Lang. And I love it. It's just a great drama noir that works exceedingly well and is perfectly anchored by Edward G. Robinson. Number 5 is Fury. This is Fritz Lang's first American film, and there's a compromise at the end that feels like it's imposed upon him by the studio. So it makes it feel a little less Fritz Lang-y than I think it is. However, I do think the film overall, including the ending, is great. It's the story of Joe, played by Spencer Tracy. He and his girl Catherine are due to be married. He has created a gas station with his brothers in Illinois. She moved out west. They're going to meet in the town of Strand in order to advance their relationship. And he goes and he pays with a dollar bill that's known to have been part of a crime from a year before. He has no alibi for the year before. It's a kidnapping and murder case that he was obviously not a part of. However, he does get arrested and brought to prison, and the rumor mill quickly spreads that he is the perpetrator. A mob forms and they burn the prison down. Joe escapes barely. Everyone thinks he's dead. He even pretty much assumes that he is dead on a certain level, and he becomes an avenging angel. The second half of the film is courtroom stuff. I am not a big fan of courtroom dramas. I do think this one handles it reasonably well. It's not great. It still uses some like surprise evidence stuff. That's not how American courtrooms work. You have to have the evidence. Both sides need the evidence before the trial. And the evidence as presented is like Hollywood cut footage that's supposed to be just from one guy from 100 feet away of a mob in order to identify them there. It's a little off, but whatever. It's kind of shorthand for how we're going to prove that these people were there. And they're guilty. And Joe has a choice. He can continue to be the avenging angel and burn everything down, or he can meet his girl Catherine again and let it go. So he can burn everything, or he can find redemption. And this being Hollywood during the Hayes era, redemption is chosen. Is this a violation of the film? Is this completely different from what Lang would have done? Apparently it is. Lang wanted to burn everything down, but the studio forced him to change. And I think the ending as it is works. It is heartwarming, it is affirming, and I think it works. That doesn't mean that it's lesser because Lang didn't get what he wanted. If Lang had gotten what he wanted, would I love this movie as much as I do? I don't know. But what I do know is that the end result is great. The portrait of Joe is wonderful, especially helped by the fact that Spencer Tracy was a very good actor. The actual progression of events is very good. The actual fire near the middle of the film is great. There's so much to love in this film. It's just curious because it is obviously a compromised film, but it's still great at the same time. Number 4 is Destiny. Now, this is Fritz Lang's 5th surviving film and his 7th overall, and he had made nothing close to this yet. What he'd made leading up to this were workmanlike efforts at popular genre stuff. What he makes here is a masterpiece. This movie is great. heavily inspired by D.W. Griffith's Intolerance, which seemed to have had a wide-ranging effect, especially in European cinema, because Carl Theodor Dreyer also made a version of Intolerance. It's called Leaves from Satan's Book. Here, it tells the story of a young couple, and they're traveling through the German countryside, and they pick up the stranger. The stranger is death. And when they stop at an inn and she goes off into another room and comes back, her husband and the stranger are gone. The stranger has retreated to his high walled territory, living next to a cemetery. The wall has no entrance. So how do people get in and out? And the woman begs for her husband's life, and death gives her a deal. If she can save one of 3 lives that he offers her, then he will allow her to have her husband. And this is where the anthology part of something like Intolerance comes in. So we have 3 different tales. One set in like Arabia, the second is set in Venice during Carnival, and the third is set in China. All 3 have the same actors playing husband and wife, also playing lovers, with the actor playing death playing a main role in all of them. So it creates this uniformity across the different pieces that, helps them tie together. And she can't save any of them. They all die. And she's presented with an option from death to have kind of a consolation prize instead of claiming her soul. And it's surprisingly touching. The movie works on an emotional level, which is really surprising because while there is wonderful physical production stuff here, as well as in the films he'd made up to it, nothing comes close to the emotional grasp of this. And speaking of like the physical production, it's incredible. It's 4 different time periods. One is contemporary-ish Germany. It's actually more like medieval. Medieval Venice, ancient Arabia, and like medieval China. And all of them are big and convincing. It all looks great. The film is a shocking triumph from the early part of Fritz Lang's career because literally nothing else came close up to this point. This was an announcement that he was actually a fairly serious artist. He just needed to shoot higher than the lowest common denominator, which was most of what he'd done up to this point. Number 3 is the second half of Die Niebelungun, Kriemhild's Revenge. So the first half is all fantasy adventure, and it ends tragically, it ends sadly. The second half is a tale of vengeance and revenge that has no magic in it at all. It's obviously this tale of Kriemhild, who is Siegfried's widow, and she is mad that King Gunther, her own brother, will not punish Hagen, who is responsible for Siegfried's death. And so, alone, she ends up accepting the marriage proposal of Attila the Hun. And so she goes off with him, she bears him a child, and she has Attila invite Gunther and his entire court to Attila the Hun's location so that she can wreak her vengeance upon him. The second half of the film is one concentrated event. It is the entire arrival, dinner, and murder of everyone. And it is amazing. Kriemhild is completely justified in her need for vengeance. Hagen is completely the bad guy. But Hagen is smart and he's strong, and everything kind of spirals out of control. A key character dies, Attila the Hun goes mad, and there's manipulation all over the place, and everything burns. And by the time everything is burning, I am kind of floored by this film. I adore this film so much. It is pure Lang, I think. It is just, the system trying to oppress everyone, and the only way to end it is to burn everything down. And it is such a remarkable emotional achievement, namely and entirely because of the central actress. Margarete Schon is fantastic. She has this steely gaze. She's obviously able to hide just madness and anger and revenge all in her face, and she carries every single scene she's in. Schon is she's one of the major female faces in silent film, and no one knows about her. Yes, we all love Falconetti and The Passion of Joan of Arc, but Schon here is at that level. This is an amazing central performance. And the physical production around her completely justifies everything else. The burning of Attila the Hun's house at the end is utterly convincing and amazing. I think it might be a full-scale burn. It's incredible. And through it all is this very clear and very hard-edged emotional reality, clinging on to Kriemhild as she exacts her vengeance. And it is an amazing journey. I absolutely love it. It will not leave you feeling good in the end, but you know what? It will thrill you the entire time. Number 2 is The Big Heat. This is the absolute height of Fritz Lang's American career. It takes everything that he was as an artist that Hollywood had largely suppressed over time, and it lets it out in the fullest expression possible, while still working in what is a distinctly American space, which is film noir. It tells the story of Glenn Ford, who is a police detective who has been scarred by violence because his wife and child were murdered by the henchmen of Lee Marvin. And concurrently, we have the story of Debbie, played by Gloria Graham, who gets literally scarred by Lee Marvin in the very famous pot of boiling coffee to the face scene. And the two complement each other in such a wonderful way that it makes me recall my issues with the Blue Gardenia, where the secret identity of the person who did the murder was hidden until the very end. And not only was the identity hidden, the actual character was hidden. So we don't really get a good sense of her. Here, we get a good sense of her, and it's Gloria Graham. She is the one who's going to kill Lee Marvin in the end. And the fact that we get so much time with her is one of the movie's chief assets. Glenn Ford and Gloria Graham have very parallel journeys in terms of character. They're both scarred in different ways by the same man, and they're out for vengeance in different ways. And it's, at the same time, we have the very Fritz Lang element of, the Destiny Machine manifesting through crime and corruption. So, will taking out Lee Marvin fix everything wrong with the city? And of course not. But it does strike a blow. So it is this very middle ground between Fritz Lang burning everything down at the end of Kriemhild's Revenge and something like the end of Fury, where, we have resolution because we choose not to take revenge. Here the revenge is taken, but it saves another person's soul, and it is a small blow, a perhaps small amount of optimism for what can come next. The film is remarkable. I love a good 89-minute long film noir, and this is one of the best of them. It looks absolutely fantastic. Fritz Lang was a great visualist from beginning to end, and the story underneath all of those visuals is so compelling and so touching, shockingly touching in the end, that I just completely get sucked into this movie completely every single time. This really is an absolute triumph from Fritz Lang in general, and it truly is the height of his American career. Number 1 is M. Now, one of my favorite things in film is the first sound film from a particular director moving from silent into the sound era. And this is one of the most complex and engrossing examples of it. He cheated a little bit. This wasn't released until 1931, so he obviously had time to study what other people were doing. But what he does is still remarkable for the year. There's no mixing at this point, so what he's doing is he's pulling sounds from different sources and actually putting them onto different images in ways to create uniform soundscapes. He's cutting in the middle of dialogue from one shot to the next. It's actually really hard to do. You're essentially cutting off the soundtrack from a piece of celluloid and then taping it back onto another. There's no mixing. And beyond that, I love that stuff, but that's not why I love this movie. This movie is kind of the first real police procedural and serial killer movie. It tells the story of a child killer potentially rapist, played by Peter Lorre, who is essentially teasing the police because, you know, he's getting away with it. And it's sending the city into a panic. And it becomes the police response, which gets covered in this great detail in this wonderful sequence relatively early between the police chief and a civilian official about all that they're doing. A more modern take would just kind of condense this into a shorter montage, but this being, you know, early sound, it's like, yeah, they're going to go into detail. However, the response is so heavy that it's disrupting the criminal element, so the criminal elements start their own investigation. And they all end up zeroing in on our child killer, played wonderfully by Peter Lorre. And he thinks no one's after him until suddenly he's surrounded, and the criminal element get to him first. And the absolute showstopper of this is the ending. It is a trial in the criminal court. Now, this is a bunch of criminals arguing on their own rules, so any sort of complaint I have about like courtroom dramas flies out the window. And it's interesting because it's mostly a battle of rhetoric, but it is told in such high energy between the defending attorney and the prosecutor, who's called the safecracker, about, you know, the nature of sin within man, about whether he can be fixed or not. And in the middle of it is Lorre giving the absolute performance of his life, to the point where I'm almost convinced he's just sick instead of just evil. But he is essentially a sick dog that needs to be put down, as the court ends up deciding. And the effect of it all is like shockingly complex. You know, it takes what can be this black and white thing, it takes what could be just a rhetorical thing for one side or the other, and it plays it out dramatically so that it ends up compelling on a character level. It is amazing. And it's at the tail end of this incredibly well-designed procedural that operates on a couple different levels, while at the same time being this incredible technical achievement in terms of advancing sound. M is an incredible film. I have loved several of Lang's films, several of them. I think this stands head and shoulders above even them. This is an amazing film, absolutely amazing. It's amazing for its time, and I think it's still amazing today. Fritz Lang made M, and you know what? Not many people can say that they made M. So that's it. That's Fritz Lang. We started really low with American Guerillas in the Philippines, but we end really, really high with M. Fritz Lang had his motifs, he had his themes. I love the whole Armageddon focus. There's only one other filmmaker I can think of who's as obsessed with the Armageddon as Fritz Lang, and that would be Andrei Tarkovsky. His themes about justice and the destiny machine, which manifests in a bunch of different ways across his filmography. The way he can kind of just inject it a little bit here and there, like in Rancho Notorious. The way he can just completely dominate a film with something like The Big Heat. The man was an incredible talent. I really think he was a great filmmaker. It's just he ended up in a studio system that didn't really understand how to use such an individual filmmaker. He wasn't just another studio filmmaker. He was a filmmaker with a voice. And I think that needed to be fostered, but he started out poorly in the American system with Fury. Fury's great, but, you know, Fury followed by You and Me, followed by You Only Live Once. We're not talking about huge box office successes here. And he ended up just taking assignments for most of his career, and it's unfortunate. But Dr. Mabuse, M, the Niebelungun, Metropolis, it's all, he left such a legacy, such an incredible legacy. And I think there's more to discover there than you probably realize. It is a lot more than Metropolis. It is a lot more than some generalized, hey, he helped make film noir thing. Man had real skills. There's a lot to discover, and I encourage you to discover it.